You trusted what I said? I'm a mother freaking zombie. Drop the chainsaw now, ho.
It's no real secret that putting a female lead in a video game is often a surefire way of making people take notice of it, and I mean that's a proven thing even as far back as Miss Pac-Man, along with a certain Raider of Tombs.
Hatching commences in 15 seconds.
Too late for abortions now. Not without the heart of the operation. No!
One of the more flagrant examples in recent years is Suda51's Lollipop Chainsaw, a hack and slash released in 2012 for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, featuring an 18-year-old cheerleader as its protagonist and asking the question, how long can the novelty of seeing up a girl's skirt last? The answer is not as long as you think. And seeing as Suda51's No More Heroes 3 came out recently, I thought it might be a fun idea to go back and take a look at this one.
Douchebags!
Right, so the story centers around Juliet Starling and a family of zombie hunters in a fictional town named San Ramiro, which happens to be the epicenter for a magical ritual bringing demons and zombies to Earth's realm, with the filmmaker James Gunn actually having a hand in its writing.
I am hideous?
You are horrifying to look at, yes.
And I do think it's kind of funny that James Gunn worked on this, considering it's a game about zombies, and that he also worked on that Dawn of the Dead remake back in 2004. I don't know if that had anything to do with his collaboration here, but either way, it's obviously a very similar premise.
I'm sorry, brother.
Especially with that whole zombie angle they've got going, along with the overall tone and the writing style, with these wacky characters and a licensed soundtrack featuring lots of catchy tunes. Overall, it is hard to fault the style and the tone of the story itself. I mean, it does its best to be fun, and it often succeeds at that. It's kind of funny too, praising the uniqueness and the originality of these characters, considering that on the flip side, having zombies as fodder enemies was about the most generic thing a video game could have done back in 2012. Anyway, the game starts as Juliet wakes up for her 18th birthday, which I guess makes it okay then that this opening cinematic shows off the silhouette of her naked body in the shower. Juliet is voiced by Tara Strong, who also provides the voice for Bubbles in Powerpuff Girls, along with Harley Quinn. And look, I'm just gonna throw it out there, but can anyone else see the similarities between all these three characters?
Hey, baby.
Daddy!
Yeah, daddy issues. Juliet's on her way to school to meet up with her boyfriend Nick, only to find out that the city's being attacked by all of these zombies, in a sequence where she displays what could be best described as a minor annoyance. I mean, she's only really upset, it seems, because the whole thing's happened on her birthday. After carving her way through the prologue, she meets up with Nick at the local park, where he's then bitten by a zombie and infected. Nick uses his dying breath to tell her that he loves her, which is kinda touching. But thankfully for Nick, she's able to use her magical zombie hunting powers to cut his head off with a chainsaw and somehow keep him alive. I've gotta say, I don't know if this reminded me more of that beheading scene from Wolfenstein 2, or that one scene from that end of that Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns is running around on robotic legs. Either way, man, it's weird.
Wait for me, sir.
And this is really setting the course for the remainder of the game, believe me. I mean, considering what's to come, a man's head being kept alive after being hacked off from its body is about the most sanest thing you're gonna see. From this point on, Nick becomes something of a comic relief character, chiming in throughout the course of the game while he's strapped onto Juliet's butt. And let's be honest, there's worse places he could have been. And if I ever find myself living on after my body's gone as a disembodied head tied to a girl's ass, well, I'd consider myself pretty damn lucky. Especially if that ass belonged to Jessica Negri. Along the way, you'll meet up with Juliet's other siblings, who all have that kind of annoying aloofness that you can only get from a Japanese writer's interpretation of what a manic pixie dream girl should act like. Along with Juliet's sensei, who reminded me a hell of a lot of Giuseppe from Wicked City, that being ethnically vague, short, and a complete horn dog. But the real focus of the story is the main antagonist, Swan, who looks like a combination of Robert Smith from The Cure and Billy the Puppet from Saw. You see, after years of being bullied, Swan has performed this ritual where he summoned 5 zombie lords from an alternate realm to help him get revenge. And in a pretty awesome twist, these zombie lords are all analogies for musical genres. The first one you go up against is punk music, the second one is death metal, the third one is 60s rock, the fourth is funk, and then the final one is just good old-fashioned rock and roll. And each of these fights ends with Juliet slicing these guys to pieces with her chainsaw, which is fucking gnarly. I think it's actually a really cool idea, and the way that all of these fights are focused around these musical genres is definitely a highlight. Even if the fights themselves are kinda lacking, which we'll get to soon enough, believe me. And pretty much that's all there is to it. Got to go around the town taking on these zombie lords one by one, running into your family members along the way, none of whom forgot what special day it is, giving Juliet a present which ends up forming the upgrades and the abilities to use in the game. The gameplay though is where it starts to get a bit tedious, and all of the creative and flamboyant characters and writing can't really save this thing from just being a downright slog at times. Now look, I know this is a hack and slash, so you can't really complain about that, but even for this type of genre, I just found that the boredom sets in pretty damn quickly. I think the prologue level's definitely the worst because at this point you've got none of the weapon combos and just can only really use the basic moveset. And that's broken up into either hitting enemies with Juliet's pom-poms, which has a stunning effect, or hitting them with the chainsaw, which is a much slower but more damaging attack. Then if enemies are on the ground, you've got a low attack with the chainsaw as well. Apart from that, you've got a jump button, which is mainly used for dodging, and it can also be combined with the other 3 attacks. For this opening level, you've got to save these innocent civilians, which is pretty damn important because keeping them alive affects the ending, but it's almost impossible to do here without any of the upgrades. So expect to spend a lot of time here mashing through these spongy enemies. Hopefully by the time you find the first upgrade shop, you can buy some new combos, which are going to make things a little bit less repetitive. And truthfully, I did think that some of these combos are pretty fun to mess around with. You can combine pom-pom strikes with a chainsaw attack for different combos. You can slide and stab forward. You can dash forward, spin it around like a top. You can even spin around on the ground and chop a zombie's legs off. There's even something as simple as Juliet using her ass to jump into and stagger enemies. And again, not the worst way to take a beating. One of the coolest moves I think is where you can leapfrog over a zombie and then run the chainsaw from their ass to their head, slicing them in half. And Juliet often has the kind of face during these moves which can only be described as looking disturbingly aroused. But it all just very quickly falls into a routine of using the same few combos over and over. Because once you find a few that works best, there's not really any reason to use any of the others. Whole focus of the combat here is the sparkle hunting, right? Upgrades for your health, damage, or buying new combos is bought with gold medals, and gold medals are earned from killing enemies, which can be earned faster through sparkle hunting. Sparkle hunting is activated when you manage to kill 3 or more enemies in a single attack, and for me, this was just about using the same chainsaw stab attack over and over to farm them. The combinations for these combos varies from only having to press 3 buttons to pressing upwards of 5 or 6. But now consider that you're often fighting a dozen zombies at once, and a single hit from any enemy interrupts the combo. And you can kinda see why you'd rely on just using the same 3 or 4 button combos as opposed to these more elaborate ones. Savvy? I love you! I mean look, one of the longest combos in the game requires me to press the Y button 7 times. And I don't think I was able to pull that one off once because I take a hit every time before I even came close to completing it. More than that though are the platinum medals used for unlocking all of the various outfits that Juliet can wear. And in typical Japanese fashion, these are about as revealing as you'd expect. God bless Japanese game developers.
Hey, Herb! Don't be looking at my skirt!
Apparently there were even more outfits available to be purchased through DLC. In case outfitting Juliet in a skin-tight pink jumpsuit with enough cleavage to bring rush hour traffic to a grinding halt wasn't enough. Damn! But again though, grinding platinum medals just comes down to grinding those sparkles, which again comes down to repeating the same few combos over and over ad nauseum. If you want to unlock every single outfit and get every single combo, every single upgrade and all that shit, well, you're gonna get real familiar with the same 3 or 4 movesets. The other thing I felt about Lollipop Chainsaw is that it's a game that's constantly trying to throw gimmicks at you, which in its defense does feel like an attempt to mix things up from just being the same old combat over and over, but it really just does feel like this constant decline. The first proper level is set inside Juliet's school as you're moving through the corridors, dealing with this appalling camera which often flat out refuses to cooperate with the player. If you've ever wanted to see an angsty teenager going through a depressing emo phase in video game camera form, well then this is it.
It's not a phase, Mom, it's my life.
You got to save your schoolmates from being lunch for the zombies, which often has some pretty funny dialogue. There's a cool sequence on a stripper pole, though why that's in the middle of a high school I've got no idea. And then another cool sequence where you can jump on all these zombies' heads like it's that stepping stone course from Takeshi's Castle. It also introduces the mechanic of Nick's head controlling zombie bodies, which requires all these button prompts, and by this point, you've probably also got a few more weapon combos and upgrades. But it's everything else here that just kinda sucks. For starters, they introduce zombies with guns, and look, I don't care what the reasoning behind this is. Zombies with guns are just never fun to fight, and they're a terrible idea. Along with timed underwater sections and escort quests, it's the one thing that a game should never fucking do. It also introduces this god-awful zombie basketball minigame, no, you heard that right, where you got to chop off zombies' heads to score points. And it sounds simple, but there's always a lone zombie defending the basket like he's fucking Dennis Rodman, so you've got to take him out each time one of them spawns back in. There's also a really weird bit here where you've got to stop flaming zombies from blowing up an explosive birthday cake. I mean, why Juliet just doesn't run out of the room is beyond me, considering that like a couple of minutes later, she ends up just doing that anyway. Then there's another whole sequence at a junkyard before the first boss, which goes on for another 10 or so minutes. Might be a good time to raise the point too of just how long some of these levels go for. Some of them easily go for upwards of 45 minutes or so for a first playthrough, which I think kind of kills replayability, because you can't just sit down and hack your way through some of these in about 10 or so minutes like you'd really want to. And this first level, I think, is a perfect example. It just goes on for way too long for the first proper level of a game, and I think it really sets the standard for how bad the pacing is. The second level introduces the chainsaw dash, which sounds like a dance move or something, but this is where Juliet can charge forward with the chainsaw as long as she's got enough fuel. And this entire level is scattered with all these ramps and fuel power-ups. You end up spending more time dashing around, I think, than you do actually fighting enemies. Having said that though, that might be a good thing, considering the enemies in this level are incredibly annoying. It's all these zombies in football uniforms who spear tackle into Juliet and knock her on her ass. Plus, it also brings back that awful zombie basketball minigame, only this time the enemy guarding the basket can't be killed. So you've got to keep knocking him off the court and stunning him so you can make the shots. Juliet's other sister shows up in this level too, giving you your next upgrade, the Chainsaw Blaster, which is the only ranged weapon in the game and basically a grenade launcher. How do they introduce this new weapon? Well, through another gimmicky minigame where you've got to defend Nick's body as he makes 3 home runs around the pitch on a baseball field, all while zombies spawn in to attack him. It was the third level though where I really started to crack the shits, and remember earlier how I said that the game had pacing issues? Well, this is the perfect example. And play 5 minutes of this one and you're gonna see exactly what I'm talking about. And it seems you can't play now for more than 30 seconds without then being interrupted and having to watch like another 10 or 15 second long cutscene showing something happening. Something that really doesn't need to be shown to the player. And they may as well have a giant neon sign pointing the right way, because a cinematic blatantly showing the way forward is the same thing. I was replaying Prince of Persia Sands of Time recently, and even back in 2003, they did the same thing, and it's just annoying. It's just insulting to the player's intelligence, like as if we can't figure out where to go next or something. You'll be shown the way forward or some crucial clue here, almost as much as you'll be shown Juliet's red underpants. I think the worst bit is when you've got to defend this bus driven by one of Juliet's sisters and shoot down all of these boulders, because before each of the boulders falls, it shows a quick cutscene as it starts to slide. This takes control away from the player for like a split second, and ironically, it makes it harder than if they just had to let the boulders fall without warning.
I never hated rock so much!
There is some cool stuff in this level though. I think driving that combine around and shredding up zombies is really fun. And although I didn't like the boss fight for this level mechanically, it does look amazing visually. Yeah, the boss fight for this level is against that weird 60s zombie lord, and there's definitely like a whole acid theme they've got going on here. The last time I took LSD, I ended up staring at my ceiling for about 3 hours and listening to chill hop, and I can definitely say that someone's done their job pretty well here, because this whole fight is also a bit of a trip. But it does also show off another trend in this game, which is the reliance on using that chainsaw blaster in these boss fights. Melee attacks are possible during some of the phases, but it really feels like for the remainder of these boss fights, they're all but forcing you to use the blaster. And let me tell ya, that auto-aim system has a mind of its own, snapping onto things you don't even want it to snap onto half the time. I mean, this blaster has more issues than Reader's Digest. Put in like a rim shot joke there, I think. This all pales in comparison to the 4th level though, and this is where I just stopped having fun and just became frustrated. So this entire level's set in a video game arcade, and throughout the level you get absorbed into these arcade cabinets for these minigames, all of which are just completely terrible. The first one is very clearly supposed to be based off Pac-Man, as you run around this maze picking up keys to the exit. The second one, I think, is based off Elevator Action, a game that I had back on my Game Boy as a kid, and one that was actually pretty damn rad. Don't know what the other two are supposed to be based off, but I can say that they're less than stellar, and both of them can just suck on this wang. Then this quadfecta of mediocrity is followed up with easily the worst boss fight in the entire game. Don't know if this guy's supposed to be based off the Spirit of Jazz from the Mighty Boosh or T-Pain. I'd say the latter though, because half the time he talks with auto-tune.
Weird voice guy.
Compared to the other boss fights, which are broken down into 3 phases, this one's broken down into 2, and neither of them are any fun. For the first part, you've got to shoot down a UFO as he darts all over the place, which the blaster is pretty much essential for. And it also poses the question as to why I've bothered buying and unlocking all of these cool weapon combos when I'm going to spend 90% of the fight just shooting someone. Anyway, then for the second phase, you've got to destroy these electrical pillars in between them being lit up by jolts of electricity, and then finally finish this guy off with a button prompt. They do kind of bring it back for the last couple of levels though. The next one takes place in a construction site with a couple of sequences that is chock full of zombies, and you can finally go nuts with all of your unlocked combos. This level probably has my favourite boss fight too, with some creative attack patterns, not to mention it's just really cool looking visually, showing off some great artistry. And every time you beat one of these phases, it knocks off some more of its armour. It actually requires you to use your chainsaw for a change too, as opposed to just shooting the boss over and over from a distance like a total bitch. And then for the final confrontation against the end boss, it's like you're taking on the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters, chainsaw dashing down the street as you make your way to this final fight. A pretty decent ending, I think, to a real hit and miss campaign, and that's really the whole takeaway I had when playing this, hit and miss. Usually when I go back and check out old reviews for these kind of games, what I find is that the critic score is often different to the user score. Like, the critic score might be really low, but the user score is going to be really high. However, this wasn't the case with Lollipop Chainsaw though, and both the user and the critic score were pretty much in sync. And I think that's actually kind of telling for the game overall. As is the case for pretty much everything that Suda51's worked on, it is a very unique game. But you just can't deny that once the uniqueness of the writing and the presentation starts to wear off, it's really just a pretty basic game that doesn't have that much to offer in the way of innovative or even engaging gameplay. There's a new game plus mode, and I actually went back in there with the intent to unlock all of the combos and outfits, and then see how creative I could get with the camera angles. But I gotta say that after grinding out the first couple of levels again, I'd already lost interest. But still, it kept me entertained for the most part, and I think it should also be noted that it might be the only game to feature an NPC that admits that he's going to wank off to the thought of the protagonist. That, and like the whole sexy cheerleader with the chainsaw thing too, I mean, that's pretty unique.